So you blink, and just like that, it's 13:25. Congratulations. You've been magically transported into a time when your morning coffee has been replaced with a mug of lukewarm beer, your bed smells like livestock with commitment issues, and your biggest concern isn't rent. It's whether or not that weird rash is scabies, the plague, or just your daily welcome gift from medieval life. Forget dragons, knights, and fairy tale castles. This is not the Game of Thrones cosplay you imagined. This is raw, unfiltered, dirt under your fingernails, wake up next to a chicken Middle Ages, and spoiler alert, you're not the hero in this story. You're not a baron, a bard, or even a particularly lucky peasant. You're just a random body with a 50-50 shot of dying before lunch. Let's set the scene. The year is 1325. You wake up with a pounding headache, not from a hangover, but because the church bells have begun their daily assault on your ears. They don't chime so much as scream, a medieval alarm clock with 0 snooze button and absolutely no chill. Your bed? Oh no, it's not a bed. It's a decomposing pile of straw, possibly hay, generously seasoned with fleas, lice, and the faint scent of fermented goat. And I know you're wondering. At least it's warm, right? Wrong. The wool blanket draped over your body has absorbed enough sweat, filth, and small mammals over the winter to qualify as an independent organism. It weighs approximately as much as a toddler riding a cow. And it hasn't seen soap since your last funeral, which might have been your aunt's, or her neighbor's, or your own, if you're not careful. You stretch. Terrible idea. Your joints crack like someone dropped a bag of dry twigs on a wooden floor. You're 22 years old, which makes you basically ancient in this era. You've outlived half your friends, probably all your childhood pets, and a shocking number of your teeth. Your knees don't bend so much as threaten to detach. If you're lucky, you'll be hobbling for another few years before dysentery. Famine, or a rogue priest ends your career as a biological organism. This isn't aging gracefully, it's aging out of spite. Your house, or let's be honest, your hut, is a one-room wooden box with 0 insulation and maximum resentment. You live there with your extended family, a goat, 3 chickens, and an infestation of insects that pay no rent and have better immune systems than you do. The walls are thin enough to hear your neighbor cough himself into oblivion. The roof is made of thatch, which is just a fancy word for leaks when it rains and ignites when you sneeze too hard. The floor is dirt. The window is a hole. The entire structure is so poorly made that you've probably repaired it more times than you've brushed your teeth. Oh, and you haven't brushed your teeth. But we'll get to that later. The smell? Incredible. A complex blend of sour sweat, old, beer, wet wool, and the subtle undertone of despair. There's no Febreze, no scented candles, no lavender-scented anything. Just the raw aroma of medieval ambiance. You inhale, and your lungs scream in protest. That's not air. That's a disease buffet. And you're the guest of honor. You attempt to get out of bed. Bad move. The floor is either soaking wet because last night's storm turned your bedroom into a swamp, or it's crusty thanks to something your cousin's chicken left behind as a love letter. Either way, your bare feet are now part of nature. Welcome to your morning foot exfoliation, courtesy of medieval microbiomes and 0 sanitation. Shoes? Huh. If you own shoes, they're made of paper-thin leather that disintegrates in sunlight and offer all the arch support of a tortilla. Most people just go barefoot, building up calluses and fungal colonies that deserve their own zip code. And privacy? What's that? You're waking up shoulder to shoulder with your entire family. Mom, dad, siblings, your one uncle who drinks too much and talks to shadows, and probably a second cousin who's just visiting for the last 8 years. There's no bedroom, no curtain, no solo time. Just constant company, and a soundtrack of snoring, livestock sounds, and someone farting with the aggression of a political protest. You don't own space. You borrow it, temporarily, until someone bigger sits down. And here's the best part. This is the good part of your day. You've survived the night. That's an achievement. People die in their sleep here all the time. Rats, sickness, roof collapses, random seizures, nightmares that feel too real because you're constantly half-starved and slightly poisoned. So, waking up? That's your victory. Savor it. Because everything from this moment forward is going to feel like a personal attack from the past. Before you've even had a chance to find a bucket to scream into, nature calls. Loudly. Desperately. But don't go running to the bathroom because you don't have one. The medieval idea of a restroom is more like a wooden container of shame behind the house that's already full, because someone couldn't handle last night's spoiled turnip stew. There's no toilet seat, no plumbing, not even a dedicated corner. Just a place you hope doesn't attract bees. And once you're done, you don't flush. You throw, right into the street. Yep. You open a window, yell, "Guardiloo," medieval French for "watch out below," and launch the horror. If the gods are kind, no one's walking under it. If they're not, well, someone's going to have a real bad day. And this is your morning. Just your morning. You haven't eaten. You haven't gotten dressed. You haven't gone to work yet. Which, spoiler, is mostly back-breaking labor that pays in pain and possibly half a moldy potato. But before any of that, you've already endured more indignity than most modern people would tolerate before their second cup of espresso. And don't you dare wish for an avocado toast. The only thing you're spreading this morning is a fungal rash you got from sleeping too close to the fire pit. So next time someone tells you they wish they lived in simpler times, smile politely and tell them about the flea-infested straw mattress, the communal poop bucket, the morning chicken footprints on your face. Because this was life for the majority of humans for centuries. Not noble, not epic, just dirty, loud, and constantly trying to kill you. Welcome to the Middle Ages. You're already tired, probably infected, and it's not even 7 a.m. Let's begin. Let's talk about where you sleep. Or more accurately, where you collapse at the end of another soul-draining medieval day and hope not to die in your sleep from parasites, exposure, or an unfortunate goat incident. Forget what you know about mattresses. There's no memory foam, no cozy down pillows, no 800 thread count, Egyptian cotton lulling you into dreams of comfort. What you have is a semi-decomposed straw sack filled with moldy hay, bugs, and disappointment. This thing isn't a mattress. It's a biohazard that just happens to be rectangular. The straw has been reused, which is a generous way of saying it probably came from the barn, post-goat. It smells like something between wet dog and compost heap, and has the inviting texture of a burlap sack that's been dipped in chicken broth and left to dry in the sun. And you're not sleeping. Alone. Oh no, that luxury was reserved for people who had something called money and walls. Your nightly companions include fleas, lice, bedbugs, a few adventurous beetles, and maybe a neighbor's chicken that wandered in and decided your mattress was a perfectly acceptable nest. The bugs? They don't just bite. They live on you, rent-free, whole families of them. You are the Airbnb for parasites, and there's no escaping them. Everyone's infested. Nobles, covered, monks, itchy. Priests might be scratching under their robes as we speak. It's the great equalizer of medieval existence. No matter your social rank, you will go to sleep knowing that at least 6 species of insect are reproducing somewhere in your armpits. The blanket draped over you is made of wool, which sounds cozy in theory, until you realize it hasn't been washed since last winter. Why? Because washing it is a full day's work, and you've got more important things to worry about, like finding food or not freezing to death. This blanket has absorbed the bodily fluids of at least 4 family members, 3 generations of livestock, and whatever diseases the last tenant had. It smells like unspoken trauma. And it's heavy. Not weighted blanket for anxiety. Heavy. We're talking possibly crushing your lungs heavy. You don't curl up under this thing, you get pinned by it. If you move too quickly, it releases a puff of dust so dense you might temporarily lose consciousness. Also, You never shake it out unless you're emotionally prepared to see bugs scatter like you just broke up a tiny orgy. Now, when the medieval sun goes down, don't expect silence or solitude. You're not sleeping in a private bedroom. That idea doesn't exist. Your home is a single open room shared with your entire family and maybe a cousin who just never left. Everyone sleeps in the same space. Mom, dad, siblings, grandparents, the baby who cries like it's auditioning for an exorcism, and your goat, who refuses to sleep anywhere but your straw pile. There are no walls, no dividers, no my side of the room. It's like a never-ending slumber party from hell, where everyone smells like onions and regret. And it's not just people you're bunking with. The house isn't sealed. It's made of wood and wattle, with cracks wide enough for the breeze, rain, and every insect in the kingdom to come say hi. Rats skitter across the floor. Mice chew through what's left of your grain stash. Spiders dangle from the ceiling and stare at you like judgmental landlords. Occasionally, something larger might sneak in, like a pig. Not because you own one, but because pigs do what they want and your door is just a piece of cloth nailed to a frame. Speaking of doors, they don't lock. Why? Because there's nothing worth stealing. Your entire worldly possessions consist of a wooden spoon, half a tunic, and maybe a bucket that leaks. Thieves don't come for your things. They come for your food, or your livestock, or because they're drunk and mistook your house for theirs. And when that happens, you don't call the cops. You scream and hope your neighbors are also awake and have a pitchfork handy. It's communal living at its worst. Zero privacy, maximum body odor. Now let's talk about the noises. There's no silence in a medieval household. You've got 8 people breathing, snoring, and muttering through dreams, a goat chewing cud, and someone inevitably suffering from something respiratory. You hear everything. Every cough, every wheeze, every suspicious squelch. It's like trying to sleep inside a livestock barn that moonlights as a tuberculosis clinic. And remember, no one bathes regularly. So the smell in this tightly packed, poorly ventilated hut isn't just bad, it's apocalyptic. If by some miracle you manage to fall asleep, congratulations. You're now in a constant war zone with the straw poking your back, the blanket suffocating your face, and the lice doing the Harlem shake on your scalp. You wake up with bites, rashes, and the overwhelming sense that something licked your ear in the night. And no, it wasn't the dog. It wasn't your sibling. You'll never know what it was. All you can do is light a candle and pray it wasn't sentient. And if you think you can get me time, forget it. This isn't your apartment. There's no bedroom door you can shut, no bathroom you can hide in with a book and headphones. The concept of personal space doesn't exist. You are always within arm's reach of someone who smells like they've been sweating through wool since the last harvest. If you want to cry, scream, fart, or just breathe without judgment, you better find a forest and hope no one follows you. Rest in the Middle Ages isn't rest. It's a temporary escape from conscious suffering. Sleep is something that happens to you, not something you choose. And even then, it's not guaranteed to be restful. You might get woken up by rain leaking through the roof, a rat crawling over your chest, or your father yelling at the goat for pooping on his blanket again. Every night is a test of endurance. Every morning is a surprise. If you wake up alive, it's a good day. If you wake up not scratching violently at your armpits, it's a miracle. So, next time you complain about your bed being too soft, or your roommate chewing loudly, remember this. At least you don't share your mattress with poultry. At least your blanket doesn't weigh more than you. And at least, just at least, you don't have to explain to your boss why you came in late because a rat peed on your face at 2 a.m. Sleep tight. Don't let the bed bugs bite. In 1325, that was less of a cute bedtime rhyme and more of a very serious warning. So, nature calls, but this isn't modern nature. It's medieval nature. And she doesn't call gently. She screams. There's no toilet, no seat, no flush. Not even a passive-aggressive plunger hiding behind a linen shower curtain. You, a brave soul transported into the 14th century, are now face to face with one of history's most underrated horror stories: going to the bathroom. Let's start with the basics. If you're a peasant, and you are, unless you got really lucky in the medieval lottery, your designated restroom is a wooden bucket. That's it. A bucket. Maybe behind your house. Maybe behind someone else's. Maybe wherever you feel the least judged by passing goats. This sacred vessel, often shared with your family, neighbors, and the occasional squirrel, is where your morning contributions go. It's not cleaned regularly or ever, because why waste perfectly good river water when you need that for drinking or not dying? If you're feeling fancy, maybe you have 2 buckets, one for liquids and one for the rest. But don't get too excited. There's no scented candle, no air freshener, no poopery. What you've got is a crusty, overflowing wooden basin filled with a family's worth of digestive regret, and it's not going anywhere. Yet. Now here comes the fun part. Disposal. You don't carry the bucket out to a sanitary disposal unit, because surprise, there isn't one. You throw it into the street. Literally. You open your window, you lean out as far as your rickety wooden frame allows, and you yell, "Guardiloo!" That's medieval French for "watch out below," though no one ever actually moves fast enough. Then, with the flair of a cursed Broadway actor, you launch the contents of your bucket into the public roadway. Yes, the street, the communal walking space, the place where kids play, merchants shout, and dogs do dog things. That is where your waste ends up. And not just your waste. Everyone's. All of it. All the time. The entire village operates on a BOP policy. Bring your own poop, and tosses it into the road with the same nonchalance we reserve for recycling. The result? A flowing, putrid river of human waste, animal droppings, and mystery liquids no one wants to identify. The street isn't paved with gold. It's paved with shacharati, sometimes literally. And don't think the townsfolk are out here sweeping up after themselves. There's no sanitation crew, no medieval version of Stanley Steamer. The most effort anyone puts into cleaning is hoping the next rainstorm washes away the worst of it. But even then, it's a gamble. The rain makes puddles. Those puddles become little pockets of bacteria and despair, splashing up on your legs when you walk too fast. A quick jog through the marketplace could turn into a biohazard obstacle course. If you're lucky enough to live in a town that has public latrines, congratulations. You get to poop shoulder to shoulder with complete strangers while trying not to pass out from the smell. These public restrooms are usually wooden benches with holes cut into them, suspended above a pit of raw sewage. There's no door, no privacy. Just a long bench where you and your neighbor can make awkward eye contact while doing the most undignified thing imaginable. There's also no ventilation, which means that once you sit down, you are immediately enveloped in a cloud of methane and sadness. Breathing too deeply is a rookie mistake. The smell is so intense, you might start questioning all your life choices. Every exhale feels like a prayer. Every inhale feels like punishment. If you think porta potties at a music festival are bad, try imagining one that's been in use since your grandfather's baptism. Now let's talk about toilet paper, or more accurately, the tragic lack of it. There are no rolls, no wet wipes. No bidets gently misting your dignity. What do you get instead? Straw, moss, leaves, rags if you're wealthy. Maybe a scrap of wool on special occasions, but that's luxury-level wiping. Most people wipe with whatever's nearby and vaguely absorbent. In some cases, they wipe with nothing. Just a quick shuffle and a silent apology to whoever has to. Walk behind them, and you wonder why handshakes weren't popular yet. Let's not forget if you live in a castle, because for some reason you think that means fancier, things aren't that much better. You might have a garderobe, a glorified hole in the wall that lets your waste drop directly into the moat below. Sounds efficient, right? Wrong. Because the same moat that catches your excrement is also where attackers sometimes try to sneak in. Yes. People have literally climbed into castles through the toilet chute. That's how desperate warfare got. Imagine being the guy who drew the latrine invasion assignment. Talk about entering through the back door. So regardless of status, peasant, priest, or lord, bathroom time in medieval Europe is a full-blown humiliation ritual. It's not private, it's not sanitary, and it's definitely not safe. One wrong step on a wet stone path, and you're face first in a pile of humanity's worst. If you're lucky, you'll get a concussion and forget what just happened. If not, you get an infection and slowly rot from the toe up. Either way, you're losing, and you still haven't brushed your teeth. So next time you complain about a clogged toilet, or your roommate taking too long in the bathroom, remember this. At least your waste doesn't go out the window. At least no one's shouting guardiloo before launching bodily fluids into shared spaces. And at least you're not trying to decide if that sharp piece of bark is soft enough to wipe with. Toilets today? Engineering marvels. Indoor plumbing? A sacred gift from the future. But back in the 14th century, relieving yourself wasn't just a necessity. It was an ordeal. A physical challenge. A test of your senses, your dignity, and your will to live. It was public. It was disgusting. And it was dangerously close to being someone else's problem. So the next time you flush and walk away like it's no big deal, take a moment. Smile. Maybe say a quiet thank you to the modern world. And then light a candle for your ancestors, who pooped in a bucket, flung it onto the sidewalk, and called that progress. You've survived the bugs, dodged the airborne feces, and limped away from the world's most traumatic toilet experience. Now you deserve a reward, right? A nice breakfast, maybe. Something warm, nourishing, comforting even. Something to give you the will to continue living in this soggy, lice-filled simulation of society. Well, too bad. This is the Middle Ages. Comfort doesn't exist, and breakfast is less of a meal and more of a medieval dare. What's on the menu, you ask? Say hello to pottage, the culinary equivalent of a shrug. Imagine the thickest, gloopiest, grayest stew you can possibly picture. Now make it worse. Now imagine it's been simmering for a week. That's pottage. It's not made from a recipe. It's made from whatever didn't rot in your pantry or run away on tiny legs. Grains? Maybe. Root vegetables? If you're lucky. Some wilted greens. A shriveled bean or two. And perhaps on rare occasions, something that used to be a turnip, but now identifies more as a sponge. This pot of sadness is never cleaned. Old ingredients are never removed, just buried beneath new ones like culinary sediment. It's less of a dish and more of a biological experiment with broth. And this pot sits by the hearth, forever bubbling. Not because you're making anything new, but because you're trying to kill off whatever started growing in there last week. The smell? Somewhere between boiled earth and depression. The texture? Like oatmeal that committed a crime and refuses to admit it. And it's not hot. Oh no, you're eating it lukewarm with a wooden spoon that doubles as a lice scratcher, and possibly a surgical tool in emergencies. Next to it, you get bread. Not the soft, flaky, golden kind that whispers sweet nothings when you tear it open. No. This bread is a hardened slab of barley-based despair. Rye or barley flour, bulked up with sawdust, acorns, or literal dirt if the harvest was bad, which it usually was. It's so tough you can't tear it. You have to negotiate with it. Tap it against the table, and it sounds like a blacksmith dropping a tool. People have broken teeth on this thing. Children use it as makeshift shields. If medieval bread were sentient, it would win every street fight. It's not food. It's a defense mechanism. And guess what? You eat it every single day. No butter. No jam. No avocado. No gluten-free options. Just a rock disguised as sustenance, served with a side of, maybe this time I'll choke and finally be free. Feeling parched? You might want some orange juice. Or maybe just a glass of water, right? Wrong. Water is poison. You don't drink it unless you're actively trying to end your suffering. Because in medieval towns, water is basically a fluid, death trap, streams, wells, rivers. Every single one is full of bacteria, parasites, animal droppings, and, on a bad day, someone's floating cousin. Drinking water is not hydration. It's Russian roulette with dysentery. So what do you drink instead? Beer. That's right. You, a medieval peasant barely holding on to consciousness, are cracking open a cold one at 6 a.m. And not just you, your kids too. Why? Because beer is boiled during brewing, which actually makes it safer to drink than the local water. It's low in alcohol, just enough to numb the constant existential dread without turning you into a liability with a scythe. It's called small beer. And it's the breakfast drink of champions who have no other options. No one enjoys it. No one drinks it for fun. You're not out here sipping an artisanal brew, describing its hoppy aftertaste and fruity notes. You're chugging liquid bread because you don't want to die of cholera before lunchtime. And by the way, this beer, it's cloudy, warm, served in a cracked wooden mug that probably hasn't been rinsed since the last plague season. Now maybe, just maybe, you're wondering, what about meat, eggs, cheese? Surely breakfast comes with some kind of protein, and the answer is LOL, no. Meat is a fantasy. Eggs are reserved for lords and miracles. Cheese happens only if the cow decides to bless you with milk that hasn't spoiled yet. Most peasants eat meat maybe once or twice a year, usually on a saint's feast day or when an animal dies of old age. You don't slaughter livestock for meat. You inherit it posthumously. And fresh fruit? That's adorable. You eat it only when it's in season and hasn't already fermented into medieval wine. You're more likely to find a worm in your apple than the apple itself. And spices? Hey, spices are worth more than your entire family. A pinch of pepper could be your yearly wage. Salt is kept in locked boxes, so your meal tastes exactly how it looks: gray, grim, and aggressively bland. Here's a sample breakfast moment. You sit by the hearth, on a stool that creaks with every movement, spooning lukewarm mystery sludge into your mouth while chewing, on a slice of brick bread. Next to you, your child is sipping beer and pretending not to cry. A rat scurries past your foot. You lock eyes. It's eating better than you. Your stomach doesn't feel full. It feels warned. This meal doesn't energize you. It doesn't comfort you. It doesn't even distract you. It just happens to you. Breakfast isn't a ritual of renewal. It's a reminder that the day ahead is going to be worse. It's fuel in the same way that kerosene is fuel. It burns everything and leaves you hollow. You finish eating, not with satisfaction, but with resignation. And then you get up. Because you have to. You've got 12 hours of field labor ahead, and that pottage isn't going to keep your body from collapsing. It's just going to slow the process. The bread sits in your stomach like guilt. The beer buzz fades before you make it to the door. But hey, at least you're not thirsty. For now. So the next time you're whining about your soy milk being the wrong temperature or the barista spelling your name Kristen instead of Kristen, remember this. You could have woken up in 1325, chewing bark bread, sipping warm child beer, and slurping sludge so ancient it might be haunted. You're not hungry. You're medieval full, which is basically the same as modern starvation, just with worse lighting. Bon appetit. Let's talk medieval fashion, and I use the word fashion very loosely, like so loose it's practically falling off, and hasn't been stitched since last plague season. You might think of knights in shining, armor or flowing gowns from Renaissance fairs, but that's costume shop propaganda. The reality? You own one outfit, not a set, not a rotation. One. Singular, faded, moldy. It is your shirt, your pants, your pajamas, your formal wear, and your funeral suit all wrapped into one filthy, louse-infested package. Your staple piece is a tunic, a long, oversized rectangle of rough wool or linen that someone probably died in before it got handed down to you. It's the medieval equivalent of a giant potato sack with a neck hole. If you're lucky, It might have sleeves, though they're more like elongated armholes that barely cling to your shoulders after years of washing with hope and desperation. And by washing, I mean beating it with a stick by the river once, every solstice, and pretending that counts. It doesn't come in colors. At least, not on purpose. If it has color, it's from stains. Mud, grease, blood, suspicious brown streaks, possibly all of the above. Forget fashion statements. You're making an olfactory threat, and your tunic smells like livestock, wood smoke, and body that's been marinating since last spring. It's not because you're gross. It's because medieval laundry practices are 1 part superstition, 2 parts lack of infrastructure, and a generous splash of soap is for the rich. Now let's pair this look with stockings. Sounds fancy, right? Wrong. These are not the sheer, elegant kind you might associate with opera nights. They are scratchy wool tubes for your legs, patched until they look like knitted maps of regret, full of holes, permanently damp, held up with string or just sheer willpower. You wear them because your bare feet would otherwise become frostbitten in winter or sliced open on the jagged plague rocks people call streets. These socks are often mismatched, stolen from someone's corpse, or made by your grandma, who went blind halfway through knitting and accidentally included a toe trap. Shoes? Only if you're wealthy or recently looted a corpse. Most peasants go barefoot, which is why their feet look like they've been aging in barrels. If you do have shoes, they're made of cracked leather with 0 sole support, possibly tied together with pig intestine and prayer. Water gets in, mud gets in, everything gets in. You might as well be walking on medieval Yelp reviews, 0 stars, full of tetanus. And let's not forget underwear. Oh wait, you don't have any. Underwear wasn't standard. At best, maybe a linen loincloth. At worst, you're freeballing under 20 pounds of wool, hoping nobody notices. Chafing is just part of your lifestyle now. If you think medieval life sounds breezy, you're right. It's literally breezy up your tunic because you're going commando 365 days a year. Now let's address hygiene, or more specifically, the complete absence of it. Medieval laundry doesn't involve detergent, fabric softener, or even hot water most of the time. Clothes were washed rarely, dried slowly, and worn until they disintegrated or were absorbed by your skin. They didn't smell clean. They smelled lived in, like the inside of an old boot that went to war and came back with PTSD. There's no scented drawer liners. No cedar blocks, no mothballs, just mildew and shame. Mold grows in your armpits. Lice live in your seams. Fungal infections flourish in places you've never even touched. Your tunic is more ecosystem than outfit. And when you sleep, you don't. Take it off. You just roll over and marinate in your own microbial cocktail. Speaking of lice, let's talk about the real medieval accessory game, vermin. Lice aren't optional. They are permanent residents. You don't get lice and treat them. You get lice and name them. Everyone has them. Nobles, peasants, priests, nuns. Even the Pope probably had a few crawling under his mitre. They live in your clothes, your hair, your beard if you're lucky enough to grow one. You'll spend part of every day scratching, picking, or smacking your skin like you're trying to slap a ghost. And if you're fancy, you'll have a comb, a fine-toothed one made of bone, to rake those suckers out. But don't expect success. You're not winning this war. You're negotiating terms of surrender. Now imagine trying to impress someone. There's no makeup, no deodorant. Your breath smells like old cabbage and tooth decay. Your feet are basically weapons. You want to flirt, but your tunic is crunchy, your socks are dripping, and your scalp is visibly alive. Romance in the Middle Ages is just 2 people pretending. They don't smell each other until they die of dysentery or marry out of convenience. Let's not forget that clothes aren't seasonal. You wear the same tunic in winter and summer. It's too thick in July and not thick enough in January. If it's hot, you sweat into it. If it's cold, you shiver in it. Either way, it traps all bodily fluids like a cursed towel you can never, Wring out. By mid-year, your outfit is less fabric and more biological sponge. You can't layer because you don't own layers. You wear what you have or go naked. And going naked gets you arrested, flogged, or declared possessed by demons. Even the wealthy weren't much better. Sure, they had more clothes, but they were made of the same scratchy wool, just with more fabric and fancier embroidery. And those huge gowns and robes, impossible to clean. Covered in fur and jewels, yes, but also crawling with the same bugs. Nobility didn't smell better. They smelled richer, meaning they could afford perfumes to mask the horror, not remove it. So no, you weren't changing outfits between events. You weren't dressing for the job you want. You were dressing for survival, and even then, barely. Your wardrobe was an act of war against bacteria, temperature, and shame. It didn't help that clothes were expensive. Like, skip a meal for a month expensive. So when you owned a tunic, you cherished that thing, even when it started rotting on your body, especially then. Because who can afford 2 tunics? A king? A witch? A mythical being made entirely of gold and unearned confidence. Fashion in the 14th century wasn't about expression. It wasn't about style. It was about not dying of exposure while keeping your privates covered enough to avoid a public flogging. It was about stitching, patching, repatching, and then sewing that patch to another patch until your clothes looked like a quilt made by a sleep-deprived raccoon. It was survival couture, grimecore, fungal wear. So the next time you throw a tantrum because your favorite hoodie shrunk in the wash, or you can't decide which pair of sneakers goes best with your vibe, remember, there was once a time when fashion meant not freezing, not bleeding, and not dying of lice-borne typhus. You weren't trying to make a statement. You were trying not to get eaten alive by your own outfit. Medieval-style tip: if it doesn't itch, rot, or crawl, it's probably not historically accurate. Let's talk about your mouth. That glorious bacteria-filled cave behind your lips. In the 21st century, it gets pampered daily. Minty toothpaste, electric brushes, fluoride rinses, whitening strips, professional cleanings, maybe even the occasional Invisalign glow-up. But back in the 14th century, your mouth wasn't a source of confidence. It was a war zone, a medieval dental horror show, a black hole of hygiene where hope, and most of your molars, went to die. First things first, toothbrushes? No. Toothpaste? Absolutely not. There is no Colgate, no Aquafresh, no organic coconut charcoal powder peddled by influencers with veneers. Your dental routine in 1325 consists of wiping your teeth with a rag if you remember, or maybe, if you're high-end, chewing on a twig, and not a special antibacterial twig from the magical neem tree. Just whatever stick you didn't trip over that morning. People would rub ashes or salt on their teeth, or gargle with wine if they were feeling fancy, but there was no science, no fluoride, just vibes and visible tartar. Speaking of tartar, let's talk about plaque and decay, because your teeth in the Middle Ages basically lived in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. You've been eating pottage full of grain mush, sour beer, and hard bread that doubles as a medieval jawbreaker. There's no refrigeration, so everything you eat is either fermented, salted, or so stale it should legally count as stone. And after every meal, you don't rinse, you don't floss, you just let the food particles hang out in there like squatters. And they throw a party. And that party is called cavities. Your teeth are rotting. Slowly, violently, unapologetically. Every bite is a gamble. Maybe it's just a little tenderness. Maybe it's a nerve screaming for mercy. You don't get fillings. You don't get root canals. You get pain. Raw, electric, bone-deep pain. And when it gets bad enough, when you're doubled over and ready to punch a bishop in the face just to distract from your jaw screaming like a banshee, there's only one solution: tooth extraction, medieval style. Now, here's where things get really fun. Dentists as a profession didn't exist yet. You know who handled your tooth problems? The local barber. The same guy who cuts hair, lances boils, and occasionally removes your spleen if you ask nicely. Dentistry was just one more thing he did on the side with tools that looked like torture devices and sounded like metal death. The go-to item? A giant iron pair of pliers. No anesthesia. No numbing. No sterile gloves. Just a firm grip, a terrifying amount of upper body strength, and a prayer to Saint Apollonia, the patron saint of dental agony. You sit in a chair, or more likely on a crate, while a man with one eye and no formal training yanks your tooth out like he's trying to pull a rusty nail from a rotting beam. You scream, you bleed. Sometimes the tooth breaks, and he has to dig out the root with a metal hook. Infection? Guaranteed. Your gums swell, your jaw throbs, your breath turns into a medieval bioweapon. If you survive, you do so minus a few teeth, and with a permanent fear of anyone holding iron near your face ever again. And the best part? This was normal. Everyone had terrible teeth, rotten teeth, black teeth, teeth that looked like ancient ruins. It wasn't a sign of poverty. It was a sign of being alive. Dental horror was part of the package. You smiled, and people flinched. Children cried, dogs barked, birds flew away in distress. You were a walking PSA for why oral hygiene matters, except it wasn't optional. It was destiny, and don't even think about romantic gestures. Kissing someone in the 14th century wasn't a sweet, tender act. It was a death match of halitosis. No one had breath mints. No one carried Listerine strips. Your mouth tasted like beer, mold, and centuries of neglect. It smelled like old meat and spiritual regret. You lean in for a kiss and your lover leans back in survival mode. Passion is immediately choked out by the fact that both of you have teeth hanging on by threads and breath that could kill small rodents. Dating in medieval Europe was less about sparks and more about mutual tolerance of decay. You didn't fall in love with someone's smile. You fell in love despite it. If someone could kiss you and not pass out, they were marriage material. If someone kissed you and had most of their teeth, you'd better lock that down before the plague gets them. Oral affection was a biological risk, a badge of bravery, an act of shared trauma. And let's not forget about gum disease. You don't have floss. You don't even know what plaque is. Your gums are inflamed, bleeding, and constantly irritated by hard bread, bone splinters, and fungal infections you caught from your tunic. They recede like your will to live. Your teeth become loose, drifting apart like emotionally distant siblings. Eventually they fall out, or you swallow them in your sleep, or a rogue piece of bread snaps them in half. Either way, the mouth is a battlefield, and no one wins. And yes, medieval people knew their mouths were a disaster. Some even tried to fix it, with home remedies that read like black magic. Mix crushed mint with vinegar. Rub sage on your gums. Chew on cloves. Gargle with wine and hope the spirits forgive your breath. They weren't completely clueless. They just didn't have the tools, or the science, or the basic ability to sterilize anything. So they did what humans always do when faced with overwhelming horror. They adapted. They lowered their standards. And then they stopped smiling. That's right. People literally stopped showing their teeth. Art from the period shows tight-lipped grins or full poker faces. No beaming selfies, no wide-mouth laughter. Just solemn expressions that said, "I'm trying very hard not to open my mouth and unleash whatever fresh medieval hell is brewing inside." You knew your teeth were disgusting. You just didn't want to remind everyone else. So the next time you brush your teeth in the morning, squeeze out your toothpaste, rinse with mouthwash, and admire your reflection in a mirror made of something other than polished metal and trauma. Take a moment. Appreciate the fact that your dental plan doesn't involve a barber with pliers and a jug of moonshine. That you can kiss someone without it turning into a respiratory emergency. That your smile doesn't trigger mass panic. Because once upon a time, a good smile was a rare, accidental miracle, and a kiss, a medieval leap of faith straight into the jaws of hell. So, you've survived the night. You've slept in a lice-ridden straw pit, survived the medieval bathroom lottery, downed a warm pint of breakfast beer, and chewed through bread that could qualify as construction material. Congratulations. You are now ready to begin your workday, which is less of a 9 to 5 and more of an until your body gives up or the sun collapses situation. Forget standing desks, ergonomic chairs, or stretch breaks. In the 14th century, work begins before sunrise, and it doesn't end until it's too dark to see your own bleeding hands. You don't clock in, you don't take a lunch break, you don't hop on a Zoom call. You wake up, you put your half-functioning body into the same damp tunic you wore yesterday, and every day before that, and you immediately get to work digging, hauling, chopping, weeding, planting, carrying, lifting, and occasionally screaming into the void. If you're a peasant, and let's be real, you are, you live on a manor, which is just a fancy name for someone else's land that you work for free while paying taxes for the privilege of suffering. Your day begins by heading to the fields, tools in hand. Except wait, tools is a strong word. What you actually have is a stick with a pointy end, a dented hoe you inherited from your great-uncle's ghost, and a shovel so worn down it looks like someone's been eating it. Modern gym rats talk about functional strength. That's adorable. You've got survival strength, powered by oatmeal slime and the crushing weight of feudal obligation. You're expected to plow fields, dig trenches, pull weeds, haul water, feed animals, gather firewood, and somehow not collapse from exhaustion before noon. The sun is already punishing you like it caught you cheating on it. Your tunic is soaked, your back is aching, and your hands? They look like you've been wrestling gravel. No gloves, no boots, just bare skin on medieval earth, slowly mutating into a hardened crust of calluses, blisters, and something suspicious that may or may not be an infection. You don't have band-aids, you have dirt. You just rub more dirt on it and keep going. If a bee stings you, that's protein. There are no breaks. There is no whistle that blows to tell you when to stop. If you rest, you fall behind. If you fall behind, you get punished, taxed, or starve. You don't stop unless you faint. And even then, someone might just step over you and keep hoeing. The idea of taking a mental health day in the Middle Ages is hilarious. Your mental health is just one long scream, muffled by physical pain and the smell of fermented goat. Let's talk about lunch, or what passes for it. There's no cafeteria, no sandwich, no protein shake. Around midday, if you're lucky, you pause to gnaw on the same cold chunk of stone bread from breakfast, maybe a turnip, maybe a bite of yesterday's pottage that's still fermenting in a goat bladder pouch hanging from your belt. You eat while standing. You eat while working. You eat while yelling at crows for trying to steal your only potato. Then you get back to it, because there are still 8 more hours of grueling, sun-soaked misery ahead. Now let's not forget the tools, or lack thereof. You want to move soil? You use a shovel that's 30% handle, 70% splinters. You want to cut wheat? You use a sickle that's been passed down through 17 generations and could now pass as modern art if it weren't coated in rust and finger blood. You have no machines, no irrigation, no pulley systems, just your back, your will to live, and the occasional ox that looks more depressed than you. And then there's the women. Oh yes, because if you think the guys have it rough, medieval women are out here pulling Olympian-level multitasking with no applause and zero recognition. Women don't get to stay home and raise the kids in peace. They raise the kids while working the fields, cooking the food, cleaning the hut, making the clothes, milking the goat, brewing the beer, feeding the animals, spinning the wool, maintaining the fire, mending the tunic, picking herbs, digging roots, sweeping ash, and probably giving birth in the middle of all that while still holding a bucket. They don't rest. There is no Mother's Day. There is no appreciation post. Just endless, exhausting, back-breaking labor with a bonus baby strapped to their torso and another one hanging off their leg asking for moldy bread. She's farming with one hand, stirring porridge with the other, and somehow managing to stop her kid from eating dirt for the third time today. And when she's done, she still has to wash everyone with cold river water and hope no one gets cholera. The work is so physical, so constant, that most people's bodies start breaking down before they even hit 30. Hernias, twisted joints, crooked backs, blown out knees, these are not conditions. These are just your daily status updates. You don't fix them. You ignore them. You push through the pain because there's no alternative. If your spine cracks like a breadstick in winter, you grunt and keep digging. If your hands are bleeding, you wrap them in rags and get back to work. No sick days, no workers' comp, just grit, grime, and a looming sense that you'll die doing this and be buried in the same field you plowed since childhood. And for what? Not profit, not promotion, not climbing the ladder. You work to barely survive, to pay your taxes to a lord who's never touched a shovel in his life. You toil so you can have just enough pottage and maybe, on a good week, a scrap of salted pork. You're not building wealth. You're trying not to starve. Your work isn't measured in productivity. It's measured in how long you can last before your body collapses into the dirt and no one even notices. By the end of the day, you're dragging yourself back home, filthy, sore, and so exhausted, you're not even sure if you're awake. You fall into your bug-infested straw pile, still wearing your work clothes, which are your only clothes, and you don't even have the energy to cry. You just stare at the wooden ceiling and whisper to yourself, only 60 more years of this, which is hilarious because you're probably going to die next spring from a foot blister that got infected while digging latrine pits. So the next time you hit snooze on your alarm clock, or roll your eyes at a Slack notification, remember, at least you're not waking up to a 14-hour shift of medieval CrossFit with a side of emotional collapse. At least your job doesn't require manual plowing, barefoot bramble stomping, and squirrel wrestling over an onion. And at least, you don't go to bed knowing you have to do it all again tomorrow with even fewer teeth and a slightly worse limp. In 1325, work wasn't a passion project. It wasn't a dream. It was a slow-motion injury that lasted until you dropped dead or got lucky enough to marry someone with a slightly smaller workload and a slightly larger goat. Grind culture? Please. Medieval peasants invented it, and they would like a refund. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where the weather isn't just bad, it's actively trying to kill you. There's no climate control, no thermostat to nudge a few degrees warmer, no AC to save you when the summer turns your house into a slow-cooking meat oven. In medieval Europe, weather wasn't a conversation starter. It was a full-blown seasonal assault. And guess what? You were always unprepared, always underdressed or overdressed, and always suffering. Let's start with winter, a charming season that brings snow, frostbite, and an increased chance of death by drafty walls. Your house, if we're still calling this rickety wood and mud disaster a house, has zero insulation. The gaps in the walls let in every ounce of cold air, and the thatch roof has more holes than logic in a conspiracy theory. When the wind howls, it literally howls inside your home. Your ears freeze, your breath fogs the room, and your fingers start turning colors that nature never intended. And what do you do to combat this glacial nightmare? You layer up, in theory. But remember, you only own one tunic. Maybe a cloak if your great-aunt didn't die wearing it. Wool becomes your best friend and your worst enemy. Scratchy, smelly, and soaking up every drop of sweat that can't evaporate in the cold. Your boots, if you're lucky enough to own them, are leather sacks tied with twine and about as waterproof as a broken promise. Socks? More like wet tubes of frostbite delivery. There's no fireplace in every room. You huddle around a single, hearth like your survival depends on it, because it does. The fire barely heats a 5-foot radius, and if the wood's wet, you're just sitting in smoke while your toes turn into icicles. Your blanket is damp. Your bed is a straw swamp. You, shiver through the night, teeth chattering so loud they start sounding like a drum solo. You're not resting. You're trying not to freeze to death in your own home. And when you wake up, that first breath of morning air hits you like a slap from a vengeful snow god. Your clothes are stiff. Your fingers won't bend. You step outside, and your snot freezes mid-nostril. But you still have to go work the fields, or chop wood, or dig latrines through frozen earth with a shovel that looks like it was forged by disappointment. Your joints ache, your lips crack, and your nose is one sneeze away from breaking off like an icicle. Then comes summer, and it doesn't feel like relief. It feels like revenge. The sun turns your hut into a sweatbox. The heat gets trapped in, your wool tunic like you're wearing a medieval sauna suit. There's no fan, no breeze. Just a wall of humid misery pressing on your lungs while you try to finish your 14-hour workday. The air smells like a livestock convention. Your body smells worse. Your skin is sticky. Your scalp is a flea circus. Sweat pools under your tunic and turns your thighs into a medieval slip and slide of chafing agony. And remember, you're not taking breaks. You're not hydrating with iced tea or a cucumber mint spritzer. You're drinking warm beer, sweating it out, and doing it all again while your armpits develop their own postal code. Showers, baths, maybe once a month if the river's not diseased. Otherwise, you just stink and bake in your own microbial marinade. And don't forget your favorite summer accessories, lice and rashes. They love heat. They thrive in it. By mid-July, your tunic is basically a portable fungal greenhouse. You've got heat boils on your back, a permanent sweat mustache, and the distinct realization that you haven't stopped itching since last Wednesday. Sleeping is impossible. You're too hot, too itchy, too angry at existence to do anything but lie there in a puddle of regret and regret-flavored sweat. But maybe you think, surely there's a spring or fall to balance things out. And to that, medieval Europe says, absolutely not. Spring is just winter's gross little cousin, mud everywhere, wet straw on your floor, and shoes that turn into sponges the second you step outside. Fall? It's winter preheating. The wind is back, the rain is endless, and your roof leaks so consistently it might as well be a feature. What about fashion? Oh yes, your one-size-fits-all misery outfit. Whether it's 10 or 110 degrees, you wear the same thing because that's all you have. And that wool tunic doesn't care about seasons. In winter, it doesn't warm you enough. In summer, it tries to murder you by heat stroke. It clings. It scratches. It absorbs sweat like it's collecting medieval tears. Changing outfits isn't an option. Owning two is a luxury. So you just suffer. One season at a time. One itch at a time. One heat rash at a time. There are no seasonal transitions. No cozy sweaters. No tank tops. You go from frostbite to heat stroke in a matter of weeks, and your body has no say in it. You are always too cold or too hot, too wet or too dry, too itchy or too numb. There is no comfort zone, just varying intensities of discomfort punctuated by the occasional lightning storm trying to kill your cow. And the worst part? No one cares. The weather doesn't get you out of work. You still have to dig, carry, chop, haul, milk, gather, sweat, and shiver like your life depends on it. Because it does. If you collapse in a snowbank, you freeze. If you collapse in a heat wave, you cook. Either way, you're not getting a break. Your corpse is just going to be slightly more seasonal. So the next time you crank your AC to 72, or pull a blanket out of the dryer and wrap it around yourself like a burrito of joy, take a second. Close your eyes. Picture yourself in a wooden box with zero insulation, sweat dripping down your spine, lice hosting a rave in your collar, and the sweet, sticky feeling of a wool tunic trying to merge with your skin. That's weather in the Middle Ages. No forecast, just suffering in high definition. And remember, in 1325, weather didn't just ruin your day. It defined your survival. Your whole year revolved around whether it snowed too early, rained too hard, or didn't rain at all. No weather app, no warning. just nature playing dice with your existence while you stood there, scratching your armpits and pretending you hadn't just lost 3 toenails to frost. Climate resilience? Medieval. Peasants invented it and absolutely hated every second of it. Let's talk about water. The thing you're told to drink 8 glasses of a day. The universal solvent. The refreshing, life-sustaining liquid that pairs well with lemon and smugness. In the 21st century, you carry it in a BPA-free bottle and sip it through a reusable metal straw while tracking your hydration goals on an app. But in medieval Europe, water was your enemy. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, literally. In the 14th century, drinking water wasn't about staying hydrated. It was about flirting with death. Imagine you're a peasant. You just finished a 14-hour shift of dirt farming, sweat production, and goat diplomacy. You're parched. You see a stream nearby, crystal clear, gently flowing, sunlight dancing off the ripples. You kneel, cup your hands, and prepare for nature's Gatorade. Except that stream, it's lying to you. It's not pure. It's not holy. It's not even safe. It's a bacteria cocktail with a side of decomposing squirrel. That picturesque brook? Someone peed in it. Or worse. Upstream, a pig just drowned. 2 days ago, someone washed their infected foot wound in it. A merchant's cart tipped over and spilled fish guts into the current. This isn't hydration. This is biological roulette. You're not sipping water. You're chugging a mystery illness, hoping your immune system shows up for work today. Wells were supposed to be cleaner. Spoiler, they weren't. Wells were deep holes in the ground that doubled as trash cans, latrines, and occasionally crypts for things that shouldn't have died near your drinking supply. Rats drowned in them. Rain carried in runoff from the streets, which, as we've covered, are basically open-air sewage systems. You'd lower your bucket into what you think is fresh water, and pull up a bucket of cloudy regret. Sometimes it smelled off. Sometimes it tasted metallic. Sometimes it bubbled, and people still drank it because there were no other options. But surely people knew something was wrong, right? Kind of. They knew water made them sick. They just had the science completely backward. See, medieval Europeans believed that washing your body, especially with hot water, opened your pores and let disease enter. That's right. They thought cleanliness was dangerous. If your skin was spotless, it was vulnerable. Dirt to them wasn't just grime, it was armor. The smell? A small price to pay for not inviting in the plague. And so, they didn't bathe. Bathing was suspicious. Taking regular baths meant you were either vain, wealthy enough to be weird, or probably a witch. Public bathhouses existed for a time, but once people started blaming them for outbreaks of syphilis, they became more scandalous than hygienic. So instead of washing, most people opted for the layer it and ignore it method. You just kept piling on clothes, sweat, and shame until the funk became part of your personality. There were dry alternatives, of course. You could rub yourself, down with a cloth, maybe sprinkle on a bit of rosemary or lavender if you had access to herbs. But actual soap? Rare, costly, often made with animal fat and lye, it smelled worse than what you were trying to wash off. So guess what happened? People kept their distance. They got used to the stench. If someone reeked of onions, swamp, and barnyard panic, you didn't judge. You assumed they were healthy, so no one bathed regularly. Not peasants, not nobles, not clergy. Even monks who were known for being relatively clean would maybe bathe once a month. Royalty? Slightly better. But even kings were just well-perfumed disasters. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly took a bath once a month, whether she needed it or not. And that was considered progressive. The idea that bathing could prevent illness didn't catch on until centuries later, when people finally figured out that washing your hands wasn't a government conspiracy. But people still needed to drink something, especially during labor-intensive days, and since water was off the menu, that left only one reliable alternative: beer. Specifically, small beer, a weakly fermented ale with barely any alcohol, but just enough to kill the bacteria in the water used to make it. This was your daily drink, morning, noon, and night. Peasants drank it, lords drank it, kids drank it. Toddlers, pregnant women, priests, everyone. It wasn't a party, it was necessity. You didn't crack open a cold one for fun. You did it because water might kill you. But beer was boiled, fermented, and relatively safe. It was warm, thick, slightly sour, and probably had bits floating in it. But it kept you hydrated. It didn't give you dysentery, and after a few mugs it made medieval life slightly more tolerable. This is why beer became an everyday staple. It wasn't about buzz. It was about not dying before sundown. The problem? Beer wasn't cheap. Brewing took time, grain, and some knowledge of not poisoning yourself. So families had to ration it, brew it themselves or dilute it further to make it last. And when beer ran out, back to risky water, or broth, or thin gruel, or, for the most desperate, wine, if you had access, or vinegar water if you didn't. You were always balancing on the edge of thirst and infection, praying your guts didn't rebel the moment you swallowed anything liquid. And when you did get sick, it wasn't a mystery. Everyone knew someone who had bad water, and that person was usually either dead, dying, or being blamed for bringing demons into the village. Nobody said, "Oh, that's just a stomach bug." No, they called the priest. They lit candles. They performed rituals. They exorcised water demons. All because someone drank from the wrong stream or licked a wet rock on a dare. So next time you fill a glass with cold, clean, triple filtered, pH balanced, mineral infused, Instagram worthy water and think, this could use a lemon wedge, pause. Remember that there was a time when a glass of water meant risking your life. When a bath was seen as a moral hazard. When beer at breakfast wasn't a frat party, it was survival strategy. Hydration was a gamble. Hygiene was an act of rebellion. And the line between drinking and dying? One dead rat away. Water. The medieval frenemy no one could trust, but everyone had to live with anyway. So you've made it through the lice, the beer breakfasts, the poop buckets, and the plague-level heat. You've survived medieval labor, medieval weather, and medieval water. At this point, you probably think, hey, I can handle anything. But wait, your stomach's cramping, or your tooth is rotting out of your head, or your legs swelling up after stepping on what may have been a demonized splinter. It's time to see a doctor. Except, there are no real doctors. Not the way you're imagining. There's no MD, no lab coat, no diploma on the wall. If you're lucky, you might find a physician educated in Latin and vague theories from ancient Greece. But more likely, your healer is a barber surgeon, a man whose resume includes cutting hair, pulling teeth, draining boils, sawing off limbs, and occasionally performing amateur exorcisms with a side of herbal guesswork. And what is this doctor basing his treatment on? A little thing called the theory of the four humors, a wildly inaccurate, stubbornly popular belief that your body is governed by four mystical bodily fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If these fluids are out of balance, congratulations, you're sick. The diagnosis isn't based on symptoms, pathogens, or anything remotely grounded in reality. No, you're just too moist or too hot, or suffering from an excess of melancholy bile. Feeling depressed? That's too much black bile. Got a fever? Too much yellow bile. Coughing and congested? Phlegm's taking over. Or maybe you're just sanguine, which means you're full of blood and optimism, which will be gone in 5 minutes when they cut your vein open. Because if there's one thing medieval medicine believes in with disturbing enthusiasm, it's bloodletting. Oh yes. If you go to your local medical professional with, say, a sore throat, his solution will likely involve strapping you to a wooden table and slicing a vein in your arm to let the evil out. The evil, in this case, being your literal life force. No anesthesia, no sterilization, just a rusty blade, and the hope that your body will somehow respond positively to extreme blood loss. Feeling weak? He'll say. Good. That means it's working. Still got that infection? No problem. Next up, cauterization. That's right. They're going to take a hot iron, heat it until it glows red, and burn the infection out of your body. This is not a metaphor. This is your actual treatment. Open wounds? Burn them. Swollen abscesses? Burn them. You stubbed your toe and it's turning purple? Slap some flame on that bad boy. The idea is that fire purifies. The reality is that you scream until you black out, and then maybe die of gangrene. Anyway. But wait. There's more. You might also get a round of leech therapy, because nothing screams scientific accuracy like sticking blood-sucking parasites onto your skin and letting them have a buffet. Leeching was thought to rebalance your humors, especially blood. Didn't matter what your problem was. Headaches, gout, fever, heartbreak. Here, have some leeches. You sit there while slimy little vampires latch on and suck out your future. And if leeches didn't fix it, it's time for trepanation. Yes, that's the one where they drill a hole in your skull to let out the bad spirits. Have a migraine? Drill. Epilepsy? Drill. General weird behavior that freaks out the neighbors? Definitely drill. You lay down, someone holds your head still, and they crank a literal hand drill into your skull. No sedatives, no painkillers, just a wooden chair, a screaming patient, and a collective agreement that this is normal. And the best part? You probably paid for this. Medicine wasn't free. Whether it was done by a monk with a bucket of herbs or a traveling barber with a surgical knife and a bowl of leeches, it cost money, which meant the poor mostly didn't get treated. They just got sicker. Or died. And honestly, sometimes that was the better outcome. Because when treatment didn't kill you, the infections might. Everything is dirty. Tools aren't sanitized. Hands aren't washed. Blood from patient A is still on the knife used for patient B. If you get cut open for a routine bleed, chances are your open wound becomes a playground for bacteria. Antibiotics won't be discovered for another 600 years. Your immune system is your only defense. If you survive, miracle. If not, totally expected. Sometimes they'd throw in a bit of astrology just to spice it up. The position of the moon and stars might determine whether today's a good day to be bled or burned. If Mercury's in retrograde, you're definitely getting drilled. Because why not throw some cosmic chaos into the already flaming dumpster of medieval healthcare? Let's not forget the herbalists and apothecaries, who were slightly less terrifying but still not always helpful. Their solutions ranged from mildly effective to utterly insane. A sore throat? Gargle with vinegar and raw egg. Stomach issues? Try dried mouse powder or a paste made of crushed beetles. They'd recommend tying herbs to your armpits to absorb the illness, or rubbing owl fat on your chest, or stuffing your nose with rose petals to cure depression. In short, medieval medicine wasn't really about curing you. It was about doing something and hoping the gods were feeling generous. And if you did recover, it was chalked up to divine intervention, not treatment. You were a walking miracle, or the town freak, depending on what mood the village priest was in that week. Death was expected. If you got seriously sick, most people just prepared to die. No one hoped to get better. They hoped to get buried quickly and not passed around for learning purposes. Cemeteries were full. Spirits were blamed. And any long-term survivor was basically a unicorn wrapped in bandages. So the next time you complain about waiting 45 minutes in a clean, air-conditioned urgent care while scrolling TikTok and sipping iced coffee, pause. Take a moment to appreciate the miracle of modern medicine. The sterile tools, the qualified doctors, the anesthesia, the fact that no one is drilling into your head because Mars is in Scorpio. In 1325, going to the doctor wasn't a path to healing. It was a terrifying blend of torture and guesswork, like being treated by a blindfolded butcher during a thunderstorm. Your prognosis was never, "You'll be fine." It was, "If the bloodletting doesn't kill you and the cauterization doesn't get infected and the leeches don't overdose you and the spirits don't come back, you might survive." Medicine or misery? You tell me. So, you've survived the bugs, the sweat, the bloodletting, and the barber surgeons who may or may not have exorcised a demon from your kneecap. You've outlived the toilet buckets and the fire-roasted wound. Care. Surely at this point, you've earned a decent meal, right? Something nourishing. Maybe even tasty. A dish to make the suffering of medieval existence a little less soul-crushing. Well, I hate to break it to you, but in the 14th century, eating is not comfort. Eating is a death-defying stunt, culinary Russian roulette. Because in this glorious age of ignorance and fermentation, every bite could be your last, or your weirdest hallucination. Let's start with the basics. Food storage doesn't exist. There are no refrigerators, no sealed Tupperware, no expiration dates. If you're storing food, you're doing it in a wooden bin, a damp cellar, or a cloth sack that also houses a family of rats. Everything spoils, quickly and violently. Bread molds within days. Cheese sweats and curdles. Meat rots into a smelly biohazard unless it's salted to the point of being indistinguishable from a brick. And even then, it's questionable. You open your food, and it's already been partially eaten by bugs, rodents, or last week's famine ghosts. There's no throwing things out. Food is scarce. You eat what you have. If the bread has mold, scrape it off. If the cheese smells like feet dipped in vinegar, close your eyes and chew fast. If the stew has a weird film on it and moves slightly when the wind blows, pray. Suffering through spoiled food isn't a failure. It's a daily experience. You chew with caution. Every mouthful is a mystery. You swallow and wait to see if your stomach responds with gratitude or an uprising. And just when you thought moldy food was the worst it could get. Welcome to the era of accidental psychedelics. You see, medieval Europe had a serious problem with ergot, a hallucinogenic fungus that grew on rye and other grains. People didn't know this. All they knew was that sometimes bread would taste funny, and then you'd see God, or demons, or your dead uncle riding a flaming pig through your hut. That's right. Some medieval bread was basically LSD on toast. Entire villages would unknowingly eat moldy rye and spend the next week tripping absolute balls. Some writhed on the ground, in pain. Others danced until they dropped. Many thought they'd been possessed, and they weren't wrong. It's hard to say if they were poisoned, stoned, or spiritually mugged, but whatever was happening, it was not dinner and a show. It was dinner and a descent into madness. Now, let's talk about the flavor, or more accurately, the utter absence of it. If you were lucky enough to avoid mold, rats, and psychedelic fungi, you still had to eat medieval food, which can best be described as functional sadness served warm. There were no spices, unless you were rich enough to burn your yearly wages on a pinch of pepper. Salt was a rare luxury. Sugar was basically unicorn dust. So what did you season your food with? Onions, garlic, more onions. A root someone swore was edible, and occasionally disappointment. Every meal tasted the same, bland, earthy, and vaguely like the pot it was cooked in, which, by the way, was never properly cleaned. Your pottage, that eternal stew of despair, was flavored mostly by time, smoke, and the ghosts of ingredients. Past. You could eat a turnip and not know it. Meat, when it showed up, was so overcooked and undersalted that it had the texture of regret. It wasn't about taste. It was about getting enough down your throat to survive until tomorrow. No one talked about mouthfeel or aroma. If you could chew it, swallow it, and not immediately vomit, it was a win. Even worse, the hunger was always looming. Food was seasonal, meaning you gorged in harvest months and prayed through the rest. Famine was a part of life. Crops failed regularly. Bad weather, war, or plague could wipe out your entire food supply. And you had to get creative. Ever heard of acorn bread? Sounds rustic, right? It was tree nuts mashed into flour and baked into inedible wooden slabs during starvation periods. Not because it was good, because it was that, or starve. In desperate times, you might eat grass, bark, boiled shoe leather. There are historical records of people digging up animal bones from graveyards to make broth. Some turned to clay or soil mixed with flour, forming fake loaves of bread that filled your stomach while slowly destroying your insides. Kids went to bed crying. Adults skipped meals for their children. And the lucky ones? The ones with food? They just hoped it wouldn't kill them. It gets worse. Food hygiene was a joke with no punchline. Raw meat sat out in the open air, covered in flies. Milk spoiled within hours and turned into cheese whether you wanted it to or not. Grains were often infested with weevils, tiny bugs you just cooked, and ate along with everything else. You didn't remove them. You adjusted your expectations. Crunch? Probably extra protein. Slime? Maybe that's sauce. And remember, eating was a communal act. You shared food with your entire household, family, servants, livestock, and whatever insects decided to crash the dinner party. You ate from the same bowl, often with your hands. Double dipping wasn't just accepted, it was mandatory. Personal plates, utensils, forks, LOL. You were lucky to have a knife, and luckier if it wasn't used last week to lance someone's infected boil. So next time you complain about your lunch order being wrong, or your oat milk latte being too foamy, just remember. Once upon a time, people bit into bread and traveled the multiverse. Every meal was a high-stakes dice roll between nourishment, hallucination, or internal organ failure. And seasoning? If it wasn't onion with a side of filth, it didn't exist. In 1325, you didn't eat to enjoy. You ate to survive. And that survival was one chewed, scratched, possibly poisonous bite at a time. Bon appetit. Imagine living in a world where your daily planner isn't filled with meetings or personal goals, but is dictated entirely by the church's calendar. In medieval Europe, life revolved around a liturgical schedule so dense with feast days, saints' commemorations, and religious observances that nearly every day was marked by some form of spiritual significance. This ecclesiastical calendar wasn't just a series of dates. It was the framework upon which society operated. From Advent to Corpus Christi, from Candlemas to Michaelmas, the church's festivals punctuated the year, dictating not only religious practices, but also social and economic activities. Work schedules, market days, and even agricultural cycles were aligned with these holy days. The church's influence was so pervasive that it effectively managed the rhythm of daily life, ensuring that spiritual observance was interwoven with the mundane. However, the church's control extended beyond scheduling. In an era where literacy was a privilege of the few, the majority of the population relied on clergy to interpret and communicate religious texts. The Bible, predominantly in Latin, was inaccessible to the common folk, making them dependent on priests for spiritual guidance. This monopoly on religious knowledge allowed the church to shape beliefs and behaviors, often using fear as a tool for compliance. Visual representations of hell and damnation adorned churches, serving as constant reminders of the consequences of sin. These images weren't merely decorative, they were didactic, instilling a sense of dread and reinforcing the church's teachings. The concept of purgatory further emphasized the need for adherence to church doctrines, as it was believed that prayers and indulgences could reduce one's time in this intermediate state. Attendance at Mass wasn't optional. It was a societal expectation. Missing church services could lead to social ostracism or even accusations of heresy. The church's authority permeated every aspect of life, from birth to death, with sacraments marking each significant life event. This omnipresence ensured that the church remained the central institution in medieval society, wielding both spiritual and temporal power. In essence, the medieval church functioned as a centralized system of spiritual governance, managing not only the souls of its followers, but also their daily lives. Its influence was absolute, its reach unchallenged, and its control over the populace maintained through a combination of ritual, doctrine, and fear. Understanding this dynamic is crucial to comprehending the societal structures and cultural norms of the Middle Ages. So, you think you're tough? Try being a woman in medieval Europe. Forget about modern-day challenges. Back then, just existing as a female was akin to playing life on the hardest difficulty setting imaginable. Let's delve into the trifecta of trials that defined womanhood. In the Middle Ages, childbirth, marriage, and the ever-looming threat of being labeled a witch. Childbirth, a deadly gamble. In medieval times, childbirth wasn't the joyous occasion we envision today. It was a perilous endeavor, a literal roll of the dice with death. Statistics paint a grim picture. In 1420s, Florence, childbirth accounted for about 1 in 5 deaths among married women. Archaeological evidence from places like Warham Percy in North Yorkshire indicates that 19% of infants died before the age of 2. Medical knowledge was rudimentary at best. Midwives, often the primary caregivers during childbirth, relied on traditional practices and herbal remedies. The absence of antiseptics, antibiotics, or any real understanding of infection meant that complications like postpartum infections were frequently fatal. To cope with the dangers, women turned to spiritual means. They wore birth girdles, parchment, rolls inscribed with prayers and religious symbols, believed to offer protection during labor. Marriage, contracts and constraints. Marriage in the Middle Ages was less about love and more about alliances, property, and social standing. Canon law set the minimum marriage age at 12 for girls and 14 for boys. However, the average age of marriage varied. In some regions, women married in their late teens or early 20s, while in others, especially among the nobility, marriages occurred much earlier. These unions were often arranged by families to secure political or economic advantages. Personal choice was a luxury few could afford. Once married, women were expected to bear children, manage households, and uphold family honor. Divorce was virtually non-existent, and separation was rare, leaving many women trapped in unhappy or even abusive marriages. Witch hunts. The perils of nonconformity, expressing dissent or deviating from societal norms, could be deadly for women in medieval Europe. The period between 1400 and 1775 saw approximately 100,000 people prosecuted for witchcraft in Europe and British America, with 40,000 to 60,000 executed. Women, especially those who were elderly, widowed, or otherwise marginalized, were disproportionately targeted. Accusations often stemmed from superstition, fear, or personal vendettas. Trials lacked due process, and torture was commonly used to extract confessions. Punishments were brutal: burning at the stake, hanging, or drowning. The witch hunt served as a means to control and suppress women who challenged the status quo, reinforcing a patriarchal society that viewed female autonomy with suspicion. Conclusion: being a woman in medieval Europe was fraught with danger and oppression. From the life-threatening risks of childbirth to the constraints of arranged marriages and the terror of witch hunts, women navigated a world that often devalued and endangered them. Their resilience in the face of such adversity is a testament to their strength and endurance. In the grand theater of medieval life, violence wasn't just a byproduct, it was the main act. Disagreements didn't simmer, they boiled over into brawls. Justice wasn't blind, it was bloodthirsty. And punishment? That was less about correction and more about public spectacle. Welcome to the Middle Ages, where brutality was both entertainment and enforcement. Disputes settled by fists, not facts in today's world, a heated argument might lead to a stern email or a passive-aggressive tweet. In medieval times, it led to a broken nose or worse. The absence of a centralized police force meant that personal grievances were often addressed through immediate, and often violent, retaliation. If your neighbor's pig wandered into your garden, you didn't file a complaint. You grabbed a club. This culture of immediate retribution was underpinned by a societal acceptance of violence as a legitimate means of conflict resolution. Honor was paramount, and any perceived slight demanded a response. Duels, street fights, and feuds were commonplace, turning towns and villages into arenas of personal justice. Creative punishments. The scold's bridle. For those who ran afoul of societal norms, especially women deemed too outspoken, the medieval justice system had a unique solution: the scold's bridle. This iron contraption, resembling a muzzle, was designed to silence and humiliate, a metal bit pressed down on the tongue, making speech impossible and causing immense discomfort. Some versions even included spikes to inflict pain if the wearer attempted to talk. To amplify the humiliation, a bell was often attached, drawing public attention as the punished individual was paraded through the streets. The scold's bridle wasn't just a tool of punishment, it was a symbol of the era's oppressive gender norms. Women who challenged the status quo, voiced dissent, or simply spoke too much were targeted, reinforcing a culture that valued female silence over expression. Trials by ordeal, divine judgment. Through torture in a time when forensic science was non-existent, determining guilt or innocence often fell to the whims of fate, or more accurately, to trials by ordeal. These tests were based on the belief that divine intervention would protect the innocent. One such ordeal involved boiling water. The accused would plunge their hand into a cauldron of scalding water to retrieve a stone. The hand was then bandaged, and after 3 days, if the wound showed signs of healing, the person was deemed innocent. If not, guilt was confirmed. Another method was the ordeal by cold water. The accused was bound and submerged in a body of water. If they sank, they were considered innocent, though drowning was a real risk. If they floated, it was taken as a sign of guilt. These ordeals were less about justice and more about reinforcing the power structures of the time. They served as public spectacles, instilling fear and demonstrating the dire consequences of transgression. Public punishments, entertainment and enforcement punishments in the Middle Ages were designed to be seen. The pillory, for instance, was a wooden framework with holes for securing the head and hands. Offenders were locked in and left in public spaces, exposed to ridicule, mockery, and sometimes physical abuse from passers-by. These public punishments served multiple purposes. They were deterrents, reinforcing societal norms. They were retributive, satisfying the community's desire for justice. And they were entertainment, offering a break from the monotony of daily life. Conclusion: the Middle Ages were a time when violence was woven into the fabric of society. Disputes were settled with fists. Justice was administered through pain, and punishment was a public affair. While modern sensibilities may recoil at these practices, they offer a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty and the long journey toward more humane systems of justice. In medieval Europe, death was not a distant concept, but an ever-present reality. Life expectancy at birth during the early Middle Ages hovered around 30 to 35 years, primarily due to high infant and child mortality rates. If one managed to survive the perilous early years, reaching adulthood could extend life expectancy to 50 or 60 years, assuming no plagues, wars, or famines intervened. Diseases were rampant and poorly understood. Common ailments included dysentery, tuberculosis, leprosy, and the infamous bubonic plague. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, often relying on herbal remedies, religious rituals, and superstitions. The theory of the four humors dominated medical thinking, leading to treatments like bloodletting and purging. The Black Death, which struck in the 14th century, decimated Europe's population, killing an estimated 1/3 of its people. The plague's rapid spread and high mortality rate instilled a pervasive fear of death, influencing art, literature, and societal structures. In this context, death was a common occurrence, not a significant event. Funerals were frequent, and the loss of family members was a regular part of life. The omnipresence of death shaped a culture that was intimately familiar with mortality, accepting it as an inevitable aspect of existence. Understanding the medieval perspective on death provides insight into the resilience and adaptability of people during this era. Despite the constant threat of disease and limited medical knowledge, communities found ways to cope, support each other, and maintain a sense of normalcy in the face of adversity. Once upon a time, in a land far removed from reality, tales were spun of gallant knights, virtuous princesses, and majestic castles. These stories, passed down through generations, painted a picture of medieval life that was as enchanting as it was inaccurate. Let's peel back the layers of myth and reveal the gritty truths of the Middle Ages. Knights, the less than chivalrous. Reality. The image of the noble knight clad in shining armor and exuding charm is a romanticized construct. In truth, knights were professional warriors, often more concerned with land acquisition and personal gain than with upholding chivalric codes. Their armor, while impressive, was not always gleaming. Maintenance was a constant battle against rust and wear. Moreover, hygiene was not a priority. Bathing was infrequent, and the heavy armor could cause chafing and sores, leading to skin infections. The notion of the dashing, clean-cut knight is a product of later literary embellishment, not historical fact. Princesses, pawns in political games. Fairy tales often depict princesses as damsels awaiting rescue, or as figures of immense power and influence. The reality was starkly different. Royal and noble women were frequently married off at a young age to forge political alliances or secure peace treaties. While the legal age for marriage was as young as 12 for girls, the average age of marriage for noble women in medieval Europe was typically in the late teens to early 20s. These marriages were seldom about love and more about strategy, with young girls having little say in their futures. Castles, cold, cramped, and crawling. The majestic castles of lore, with their grand halls and luxurious chambers, were often cold, damp, and uncomfortable. Heating was inadequate, with large stone walls retaining the chill. Windows were small, limiting light and ventilation. Sanitation was poor, leading to infestations of lice, fleas, and bedbugs. Even the nobility were not spared from these conditions, as the concept of personal hygiene was vastly different from today's standards. The romanticized castle life is a far cry from the drafty and pest-ridden reality. Conclusion. The Middle Ages were a complex and challenging period, far removed from the sanitized versions presented in fairy tales. Knights were not always paragons of virtue, princesses had limited agency, and castles were more about defense than comfort. By understanding the truths behind these myths, we gain a more accurate and nuanced view of history, appreciating the resilience of those who lived through such times. In medieval Europe, your birth was your destiny. The rigid feudal system ensured that social mobility was nearly impossible, and the class you were born into dictated every aspect of your life, from your occupation and diet to your health and lifespan. This stark division created a society where the privileged few lived in relative comfort, while the majority toiled in hardship and squalor. The immutable social order, the feudal hierarchy, was a well-defined structure. At the top sat the monarch, followed by nobles, knights, and clergy. Below them were the vast majority, peasants and serfs. Nobles enjoyed privileges and luxuries, including better food, clothing, and access to education. Peasants, on the other hand, worked the land and were bound to their lords, with little hope of improving their circumstances. Life expectancy, a tale of two. Classes. Life expectancy varied significantly between classes. Nobles, benefiting from better living conditions and diets, could live into their 50s or 60s. Peasants, however, faced harsher realities. High infant mortality rates and lack of medical care meant that many peasants did not survive past their 30s. Dietary disparities. The diets of nobles and peasants were markedly different. Nobles had access to a variety of foods, including meats, spices, and imported delicacies. Peasants' diets were monotonous, consisting mainly of bread, pottage, and occasional vegetables. Meat was a rare luxury. This nutritional gap contributed to the overall health disparities between the classes. Health and hygiene. While nobles had better access to medical care, the understanding of medicine was rudimentary across all classes. Peasants often relied on herbal remedies and superstition. Poor sanitation and living conditions led to frequent outbreaks of disease, which disproportionately affected the lower classes. The great equalizer: plague and famine. Despite the disparities, certain calamities did not discriminate. The blacks. Death, which struck Europe in the 14th century, decimated populations across all classes. Similarly, famines caused by crop failures affected both nobles and peasants, though the latter suffered more due to lack of reserves. Reddit. Conclusion: the medieval class system was a rigid structure that dictated every facet of life. While nobles enjoyed privileges and comforts, peasants endured hardship and deprivation. The divide was not just economic but permeated health, diet, and overall quality of life. Understanding this brutal divide offers insight into the struggles and resilience of those who lived during this era. Imagine living in a world where the sky weeps endlessly, the earth turns to sludge, and every breath carries the scent of decay. Welcome to early 14th century Europe, a time when nature, disease, and human folly conspired to create a living nightmare. The Great Famine of 1315-1317 was not just a food shortage. It was a catastrophic convergence of calamities that tested the very limits of human endurance. The perfect storm, nature's wrath, unleashed. It began with relentless rains in the spring of 1315. For 2 years, Europe was drenched, turning fertile fields into swamps and making planting or harvesting nearly impossible. Grain rotted in the fields, and hay for livestock couldn't be dried, leading to mass starvation of animals. Cattle diseases further decimated herds, with some regions losing up to 80% of their livestock. The resulting scarcity caused food prices to skyrocket, making basic sustenance unaffordable for the majority. Societal collapse, when desperation knows no bounds. As hunger tightened its grip, societal norms unraveled. Reports from the time speak of theft, violence, and even cannibalism. In some areas, parents abandoned their children, unable to feed them, while others resorted to consuming the dead. The famine didn't discriminate. Both peasants and nobles suffered, though the poor bore the brunt. The weakened population became susceptible to diseases like pneumonia and tuberculosis, further increasing mortality rates. War and conflict, adding fuel to the fire aze. If nature's onslaught wasn't enough, human conflicts exacerbated the crisis. Wars disrupted trade routes, destroyed crops, and diverted resources away from relief efforts. Armies pillaged the countryside, taking what little food remained and leaving devastation in their wake. The combination of war and famine created a feedback loop of suffering, where each calamity intensified the other. The aftermath: a changed Europe. By the time the rains subsided and harvests resumed in 1317, Europe was irrevocably changed. Estimates suggest that 10–25% of the population perished during the famine. The trauma left deep psychological scars, eroding trust in institutions like the church, which had failed to provide relief. This disillusionment set the stage for future upheavals, including the Black Death and the eventual Reformation. Conclusion: survival against all odds. The Great Famine stands as a testament to human vulnerability in the face of overwhelming adversity. It was a period where survival was a daily struggle, and the line between civilization and chaos blurred. Yet, from this darkness emerged resilience. Communities adapted, agricultural practices evolved, and Europe slowly rebuilt. The lessons learned during this time would shape the continent's future, reminding us that even in the bleakest moments, humanity has the capacity to endure and overcome. In the heart of the Middle Ages, amidst the relentless grip of plagues, famines, and wars one might expect despair to have extinguished all joy. Yet, remarkably, humanity's spirit persisted, finding solace in song, storytelling, and love. These cultural expressions served not merely as entertainment, but as vital mechanisms for coping and survival. Singing amidst suffering during the Black Death, communities often turned to music as a means of coping with the overwhelming loss and fear. The Geisler Lieder, or flagellant songs, emerged as a poignant example. These were simple, unaccompanied songs sung by groups of flagellants who roamed Europe, seeking divine intervention through penance and song. The music was often call and response, fostering a sense of unity and shared purpose among participants. Such musical expressions provided a semblance of control and communal solidarity in an otherwise chaotic world. Storytelling as a bomb fairy tales and storytelling played a crucial role in medieval society, offering both escapism and moral guidance. These narratives allowed individuals to process their experiences and emotions symbolically. For instance, the tales collected in Giovanni Boccaccio's The Decameron depict a group of young people who flee the plague-ridden city of Florence and pass the time by telling stories. These stories, rich with themes of love, wit, and resilience, provided a framework for understanding and coping with the harsh realities of life. Love in the time of turmoil, even amidst widespread suffering, love found a way to flourish. Medieval romances, such as the tale of Tristan and Isolde, highlight the enduring power of love to transcend adversity. These stories, often set against backdrops of war and hardship, emphasize the human capacity for deep emotional connections. Such narratives not only entertained, but also reinforced the idea that love and human connection were possible and valuable, even in the darkest times. Resilience through culture. The persistence of music, storytelling, and love in medieval times underscores humanity's innate resilience. These cultural practices provided comfort, community, and a sense of identity, enabling people to endure and make sense of their suffering. They served as reminders that even in the face of overwhelming adversity, the human spirit could find ways to adapt, persevere, and even find joy. Conclusion. The Middle Ages were a period of immense hardship, yet they also demonstrated the remarkable capacity of humans to find light in darkness. Through song, story, and love, people not only coped with their realities, but also laid the foundations for cultural expressions that continue to resonate today. Their laughter amidst the turmoil serves as a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit. After this journey through the grim realities of medieval life, one thing becomes abundantly clear. We are incredibly fortunate to live in the modern era. The Middle Ages were marked by relentless hardships, plagues that decimated populations, famines that left communities starving, and wars that tore societies apart. Yet, amidst this darkness, people found ways to cope, to find joy, and to persevere. They sang songs, told stories, and found love in the most unlikely places. Their resilience is a testament to the indomitable human spirit. But let's not romanticize the past. The so-called good old days were anything but. The average person lived a life of toil, disease, and oppression. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, at best, and superstition often took the place of science. Social mobility was nearly non-existent, and the majority of people had little control over their destinies. The comforts and freedoms we enjoy today are the result of centuries of progress, struggle, and sacrifice. So, the next time you're tempted to complain about a slow internet connection or a delayed flight, remember the people who lived through times when survival was a daily challenge. Appreciate the advancements in medicine, technology, and human rights that make our lives not only more comfortable, but also more meaningful. If this exploration of history has sparked your interest, please like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more content that delves into the fascinating and often sobering realities of the past. Let's continue to learn from history, not to glorify it, but to understand the resilience of those who came before us and to appreciate the progress we've made.